Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Resources Scrutiny Commission. Introduction, safety information. I think you all know where the fire exits are. There's not a fire drill expected. In terms of introductions, can I just say in particular, we have with us the Council Tax Reduction Scheme team, in case there are any questions on their report. I have indicated that I think it unlikely there will be, given the change in policy that has come about, and I dread to think how much time we've spent scrutinising this to get to this stage, but I do recognise, officers, that's nothing compared to the amount of time that you've put into producing the reports and information for us, and I will say at this stage incredible detail and an enormous amount of effort for which we were appreciative at the time, so thank you. Can I just also start by setting the scene and just reminding you that this is a two-part meeting to consider the budget consultation proposals, and therefore we will adjourn at the end of this afternoon's meeting and reconvene. So we have one lot of public forum that is at today's meeting, and that covers both sessions. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. Apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Councillor Goodman, and there are no other apologies here. No. Members, of any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the previous meeting, they've been circulated. Is everybody happy those are a correct record of the meeting? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think I've covered Chair's business in the first item on the agenda, so that speeds things up a bit. So we move on to public forum, and we have two items of public forum, and both members of the public are here. And I'm just calling up my notes. So, questions from David Redgewell first. David, you've had officer replies. Do you have any supplementary questions? Do you have a microphone?
No. The questions are online. I can't hear them. So I'm trying to get onto the Bristol guest. But yeah, I mean, on my question really, I suppose, is the relationship with the transport levy and the councils. I'm not aware of any public meetings, scrutiny commissions or boards in the way Peterborough and Cambridge have, or to democratically basically talk about the item, because obviously the WECA Act specifies buses as a joint service. That's in the legal document. Like because of other things at WECA, we've been drawing down the WECA Act in great detail at the moment. So really, I suppose the question I'm asking is there going to be some formal discussions in public about the levy with this local authority and the other three? And it also includes in the legal document, even though they're not full member, North Somerset Council. So I suppose that's the issue.
Sorry, can I just be clear, because there's two aspects. One is the amount of the levy, and the other is how Bristol is funding its share of the levy. Which bit are you questioning?
I think how Bristol's funding it, and then the other thing is what worries me after last year. And this is not a criticism of Bristol, because it was done across the 4 UAs this way. There wasn't a transparent process of how that levy was being made and taken forward. And that is very, very important to the people I represent. That's passengers and older people and disabled people who want to understand how this is happening, because this is their livelihoods, this is the way they move around the city. They're not rich people, they don't have the kind of salaries that WECA have. They need a bus service, are basic to get to shop, school, work, leisure, shopping, basic food shopping, and they just want to understand how this is being constructed.
I think it's not just the people you represent, David. I have a feeling it's the people we represent as well.
I can only speak for the people that I represent in terms of passenger points.
I don't know, Stephen or Denise, can you just clarify whether the transport levy is being debated with WECA or whether it is simply being prescribed by WECA?
Well, I think all the proposals that are currently out for discussion are contained in the report. And as you know, we don't do a zero-based budget, so we start from last year's budget and we make representations and have a discussion based on changes. So there is reference to the levy in the pack. As far as I'm aware, therefore, that will be the only change. So the current position will be we start with a flat position, and you obviously in the context of all of the other pressures and the need to create a balanced budget, which I'm sure Councillor Cheney can elaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously setting the levy internally is part of our budget setting process that will be agreed in full council in February. Are we recommending changes to the levy? We haven't got to that stage yet. However, any increase in the levy is a decrease in the budget for someone else. So trying to find budgets to decrease is very difficult. So,
David, I know you want to carry on this debate, but I've let it go on a bit longer.
Statement. I'll do my public statement.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the other thing there is, you were asking about a conversation with WECA. I mean, there will be a conversation. There has been a conversation. Will it happen in public meetings? I'm not sure.
More interest in dogs, I'm afraid.
So, do you have a supplementary to your second question.
Sorry, can you put the second question up? I'm showing on Bristol Gas. That's question 1 up there. Is it possible to question 2 up, please? Sorry, BT, put the guests, they're showing you back out twice. Yeah, so that our second point is about the decision made by Cabinet and the Mayor last year to transfer staff from this authority to the West of England Mayoral Combined Transport Authority. We see there's very little progress happening on that, and our concerns are raised because the authority is continuing to run its arrangements on consultants and interim local government officers, many of which fill posts that possibly would be filled by officers from this authority if the transfer takes place. So as the issue we're asking is really, is there progress on that?
Okay. Yeah, John.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Yes, we've put an answer in the response, but we have, I think the paper talks about having discussions with the Combined Authority about transfer of functions and potentially staff. That is something that we have had. We've reached the position with them that the Combined Authority have told us that they weren't ready to carry on with those discussions due to various work that they were progressing internally, so we're not continuing those discussions at the current time.
Okay, thank you, John. Dan, you have a supplementary to your question for your answer, right?
Yeah, so I asked 2 questions. I didn't really get the first question was about what changes are being made to the wording or other details of the scheme to reduce the number of appeals that are successful. I didn't really get an answer to that, but I suspect I might not if I get past that, a supplementary to that. So the second question I asked was, does Bristol Council feel there's any risk that there would be any risk that a large number of charges would need to be dropped and wouldn't be paid? My supplementary, the answer given was that everyone's very confident that it would hold up in a court of law. So my supplementary is the Transport Act 2000 says that any excess revenue that may arise from charges above the costs of operation need to be reinvested. That money spent should aim to improve air quality and support the delivery of the ambitions of the zone while ensuring this does not displace existing funding. Such charges may not be used as a form of taxation to raise revenue generally. So my supplementary is that does not appear to be happening, and it seems to be quite a legal risk. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Chair, are you happy for me to?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dan. So we've answered the questions that you sent in, but on that specific supplementary, yes, you're absolutely right. Those are the rules that govern how we can apply the clean air proceeds and revenue. They're supplemented by our local order, as I'm sure you know. So that is the basis on which we're bringing forward proposals about how we're going to utilise any surplus revenue. We're going to be talking about that later on the agenda, I think, Chair, so we can go through that then. But we are working on the basis of the provisions that you've talked about there.
Thank you, John. And then we move on to public forum statements. Again, from David and Dan, you each have 1 minute to summarise your statement. David.
Yeah, so to summarise the statement we'd like to put in is basically, we do see there's a need to save money with the West England Mayoral Combined Authority in duplication with Bristol City Council, Baines and South Wiltshire. I'll give you one quick example: bus shelters. Bristol control them, WECA stick up all the timetables, duplication of effort, duplication of public resources and staff, and it doesn't happen in any other combined transport authority in England. So there is money when we're up against the financial crisis, the 114 no responsibility in these authorities. We need to look at everything, and that is something that needs to be looked at. Very clearly, there's a lot of consultants at WECA, there's interim officers at WECA, it's costing huge amounts of public money. The duplicate services of Bristol City Council. We've been looking at this with the Bristol Older People's Forum. We need to make some progress. WECA is the transport authority, not Bristol City Council, by law and by statute and by act. Bristol's highway authority, like Baines, South Gloucester and Somerset. So that's the first point. The second point is the levy. I welcome
10 seconds left then.
Okay, I welcome the point, the work that Craig is doing, and on the congestion charge zone. No, it's not congestion, it's the actual clean air zone. But that money going back into buses will help to relieve places like West Country and Ashton Vale, Aubrey Court, the bus deserts of Brislington, and into the city region where they simply do not have a public bus service, not even a Westlink. And they're reliant on on taxis at £20 a time, which is totally unacceptable with officers on the kind of money WECA's doing. So I would ask that that's worked on, we look at that levy, and we have an open discussion with the community in Bristol and the other 4 unitary authorities, sorry, 3 unitary form part of the city region. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dan, you have 1 minute.
It's almost a month since the emergency evacuation of Barton House. Since then, this council's released very little information about the nature of the emergency, or even any guesses about whether the building will be legally habitable again. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion about the council tax reduction scheme, which involved an estimated saving ranging from between 1.9 to 3.9 million per annum. That seems to be a smaller amount of money than it is likely to be needed to be spent on handling the Barton House situation in the coming year. It seems that this committee should have more information about what's going on with Barton House to be able to properly set a budget.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. So, we note those statements and move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the council tax reduction scheme. Members will be aware that the Cabinet has now decided to take the view the majority of members of this committee had previously indicated. So I am hopeful that we won't need the 60 minutes allocated, although I am sure members could give it a try to achieve that if they wanted to. But I'm very happy to take comments or questions, and officers are here to answer if appropriate. Gary, Heather.
I wanted to respond to one of the items in public business there. That I'm considerably worried about the clean air zone paperwork. There's only a trickle of appeals at the moment, but if the appeals seem to be on fairly fundamental wording problems, and I'm recommending that we recommend a thorough review of the wording involved there from an outside party.
Sorry, we're on to the council tax reduction scheme.
Well, it's not before us,
No, I've moved on to item 7. Heather.
Hello. On council tax reduction scheme, obviously there was a strong view amongst many of the councillors and that decision was made, so I won't go over our views and that decision. We welcome that decision, but I do want to talk more about the consultation. We put a consultation out there, we put it out again. I understand what had gone wrong there. We've had sessions discussing the results of that consultation. There was 12 different ways you could probably interpret the results of that consultation. You could say that a majority favoured some change. You could say that actually a majority favoured either no change or making sure people with disabilities or certain benefits were protected. It could have been cut all sorts of ways, and I really struggled with the number of options and how to interpret it. And I think my question is there a process for considering how we all would consider the results of the consultation before we put a consultation live? Should there be a process, or we actually write that out in advance? Because I feel like we put a consultation out there, we got some answers, and then realised with those answers it wasn't clear what we should do. is there an improvement in that process? And I do understand that there were many people working on that consultation. I'm not, you know, it was, I think it fell through a lot of gaps, but I wouldn't want to see a consultation like that again.
I mean, I'll start, but I'll let Graham come in as is his team. I mean, I guess the problem that certainly I feel the team had is that the task and finish scrutiny group didn't particularly want to remove any options, which made it incredibly difficult, therefore, to write a consultation that didn't have all the options in it. And had they decided to remove some of those options, I'm sure we would have been sitting there talking about the removal of options, some democratically and so on. So I think it was tough, and I think the team did a good job in the circumstances. It's not easy. It's a really difficult topic. It's a really difficult conversation, and if we wanted anything more than a kind of yes or no type response, you had to have a range of potential choices in there. We could have slimmed them down, I suppose, but you know, I think there's a lot of intel that comes out of that consultation. I think it's really useful, but actually, even though we've decided to do nothing with it, I think it's useful for future iterations. Should this ever come up again as a conversation topic in next year, year after, whenever. We've got quite a lot in our back pocket already of information, I think. Right.
Can I add another point and then about the HOA consultation with the sliding scales and the multiple options? That was fabulous. That put a number of different options that were against each other for people to prioritise. I'm sure that takes a lot more work. I'm sure that takes a lot more money to produce something like that. Was it considered, I mean, it was asked for a number of times, was it considered to have some sort of consultation like that? How difficult would it have been? Because I do think when we are trying to put 9 options against each other that also have a variable overall cost, something like that is necessary, and can we do more of that in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I will quickly comment on that. So that's originally our very first budget. We used that process, the budget slider process. We did that to try and help the public understand how difficult it was to make the choice between cutting one thing or that and repercussion like somewhere. We almost got no one complete it because it was so difficult to actually to make the decisions in the end. Very few people wanted to say, actually, I'll close libraries because I want more money for children's homes or whatever. Yeah, but HRA is not quite as many emotive topics in it, or certainly differently emotive topics. So I don't know that it works in every scenario. I mean, it can be considered every time. We have to buy it, so it's not free. You've got to pay for that. It's a tool you have to buy from the organisation that built it. But it can be used for other things. I don't know if it was discounted particularly in this case. I wasn't aware of that conversation.
Just to add to that, it wasn't a question of cost at all that was the reason it was discounted. It was simply an issue of complexity, because effectively every option has a different outcome on every single, well, not every single, but a vast majority of different households. So it wasn't a cost consideration, it was just the complexity of trying to get that in. What we did also consider was effectively to try and put that, to bring that to life, was then the additional information around households and how it would impact in different households. So there's like, from memory, 10 different scenarios. So that was our way of trying to cover 9 different options in different ways for different households, but appreciating, because of the complexity we've talked about, nothing was perfect, if we're honest. But there is, as also mentioned, lots of lessons learned, and we're already looking at those. I'm happy to share this out with the group when we can.
I'm only going to add 2 points really. I mean, certainly my recollection of the TFG was there wasn't any consensus to take any of the options on. So, you know, from our point of view, it was quite difficult. We still had the bandit scheme on it as well at one stage, which fortunately came off towards the end. And I do think we need to understand, you know, if we're going to get a reasonable amount of responses, that we do need to make it as simple as we possibly can for people to understand. And maybe in, you know, in hindsight, some of the additional subsections of it were probably a bit too much. I mean, the second point I make is I've already been in conversations with a couple of authorities that are in consultation as well. And, you know, I don't think it's probably a surprise to think that an awful lot of authorities are going to be looking at this in the future. So absolutely any lessons we can learn from how others have done it. Because sadly, I think a lot of authorities will be consulting on it as well.
Mark? And then Tim.
Thanks, Chair. I welcome the decision not to make changes to the council tax reduction scheme, but in so doing I recognise the challenges with the budget and the cuts that we've been continuously facing. And also as a member of the Finance Task Group, recognise the complexity of consulting on this issue. It's not a straightforward yes or no answer. I wanted to go back to something that Craig said about the information that's come out of the consultation, whether there are any particular insights in how we can better support these very vulnerable people in our society, and whether there are reconfigurations of service, whether it's within the council or with our partners, that can better target help towards its most needed. So I suppose it's on that insight question that I'd be quite interested.
I'm going to start with a bit of context. I think we're in the process of still trying to find out whether the Household Support Fund will exist for 24-25, because as you'll be aware that in the autumn statement it wasn't mentioned, and then there was a parliamentary question which said it would exist, and now we're not entirely sure whether that's the case. So my concern is we won't have that, and if we don't have that, that's £8 million that we've had in previous years that we've used, as you know, for the likes of free school meals, etc., etc. So we will need to be really creative and really targeted with whatever support we have got next year, if that is not the case. But at the moment, we don't know the answer to that question because there hasn't been any clarity. And until we do, we're working on two completely separate scenarios, aren't we? But from my perspective, certainly anything that we've got there that enables us to look to do what we can do with welfare provision in 24-25 would be absolutely welcome. And it is the case that even before this, that if you look at the council tax reduction stats, they will give you indications by ward. And frankly, none of it ever comes as a huge shock or surprise. You know, it tends to be, we know which the deprived wards are. But certainly that's something that we can factor into where we go for 24-25.
Tim and then Gary.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to reiterate what Mark said really, in terms of very much welcome the decision, but also appreciate how much work has gone into getting to the point of no change. Because I appreciate we've had a lot of discussions in private. This is the first chance really in a public forum to recognise the complexity of that issue. But I really do think it's very important that at the current time we recognise how important this scheme is to Bristol, and that we've managed to keep this going when so many other councils haven't. But I don't really have a question, sorry.
Thank you. Gary.
Yeah, I too welcome the decision to drop the plan. I, as well as actually being concerned about the households who have been negatively affected, or vulnerable households, right from the beginning, you're raising the matter of the cost of trying to collect money from people who just, in lots of cases, don't have it, or are in a very difficult circumstance. And we got loud and clear from officers in our meeting that those concerns were well founded. Were those not flagged up early in the process? Because it's one thing trying to raise £3 million. It's another thing if you raise the £3 million and it's costing a huge amount of money to collect it. So I'm just wondering why given that figure that it still lasted as long as it did.
I mean, personally, I don't need officers to tell me how difficult or the people impacted by changes to the council structure. I know that. I grew up on it personally. I understand it probably more than other people do. That said, it is our largest area of discretionary spend as a council. Every time we get to a point of having to make incredibly difficult decisions, it's inevitable that the council tax reduction scheme comes up as a conversation, and it is right for the people of this Bristol to have their say on whether or not they think that's the way we should be supporting people. Now, I take your point, it is difficult, and it's not an area that we wanted to go at, and again, we've decided not to go at it, but it is an area, continues to be our largest area of non-discretionary spend as a council, and will continue to have to be looked at by future iterations of this council in the future. As we raise council tax each year, which we've been doing, to counter the inflation and the lack of funding from central government, that burden gets heavier, because of course the percentage rate is topping up every year, so it's going to continue to be a problem. It's going to be a building problem year on year, and it's going to get bigger. That doesn't mean that we should ever change it, and I don't believe that we should, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be consulting the public on it regularly.
I'd just add to that, I mean, obviously we are considerably an outlier now with regard to this. You know, we are the only core city, certainly I know Newcastle have got a discretionary scheme that potentially means you can come 100% leave it, but you have to go through an awful lot of hoops in comparison. And certainly with regard to collection, you know, the fact of the matter is we were looking to collect as much as we possibly could, but we do recognise there would be circumstances in which people would not be able to pay. And obviously we've got an ethical debt policy, so with regard to that we would look very much sympathetic to those cases, but you know, as Greg said, you know, with the situation that we were in, it was felt to be the best option.
I think I probably just want to come in at this point, and I think I wanted to just reflect on the point that Graham had made, that the majority of local authorities have this scheme in place. The majority of local authorities manage to collect the relevant amount of income associated to this. Many of us use exactly the same system, we use the same accounting system, we use the same council tax system. So I wouldn't anticipate that Bristol would have any other challenges that any other authorities don't have, because we're not unique in this instance. So I recognise the decision not to collect it, but actually I wouldn't want us to think that that it's as a result of the administrative burden, because I think we'd have to ask, why are we different, considering we are all following the same processes, procedures, and have similar challenges.
Okay, any other questions from members? Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is a sense of relief, and I recognise all of the complexities around this issue. But what's now happened is the Mayor has said he would like members to help find the missing, or what will be the missing 3 million. So are we going to discuss that here?
I mean, so there'll be a budget scrutiny session presumably in January where we'll have to have those conversations. I mean, we're not going to discuss it. This is the consultation meeting discussion and everything. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to talk about that as we go into the budget settlement process.
Okay, I'm proposing to close this item. Thank you. The officers who were here for that item are free to stay for the rest, but we won't take it personally if you have other things to do. So thank you for your time. So we move on to part 1 of item 8, which is dealing with the budget consultation, and the supporting papers for that are referred to, which is the medium-term financial plan, the previous resources scrutiny and finance task group submission to full council, and the budget consultation as published on the council's website. And there's one more item that's not on the agenda. Oh yeah, which is the list of the 11 best to save proposals as well. So that's basic supporting documentation. And then what we've scheduled is the first part of questions that came out of task group discussions. And item A is growth and regen, clarification on clean air zone income and utilisation. Now, if I sort of set the scene, in that when it comes to us looking at things like the collection fund, we have an indication of how performance is going and where things are in the course of the year. When it comes to the clean air zone, the Commission has no idea of how much income has been raised. All we know is how much money has been already earmarked this year and how much money is being earmarked for next year. We've no idea whether that is more or less than the total raised, what additional sums are being raised, what the plans are for those. And I'm Craig, perhaps I can ask you, because it would be unfair to ask Denise this, but in a way it's not right that a scrutiny commission has to put in a freedom of information request to get the information. but it seems odd that we're told we've got to wait until sometime in the new year to see figures when they are pretty fundamental to next year's budget process. So when are we able to see that information?
So the point of the Clean Air Zone is a public health intervention, and it provides data at the end of 12 months. So giving financial income in the meantime is a misleading figure, and we've been really keen that we bring, for the sake of public discourse, I suppose, the two together at the same time. So we will bring, at 12 months, so that will be January, we'll be bringing before the budget, or certainly within the budget conversations, budget setting conversations, forecast for next year, the income that we've made this year, and the impacts on the public health intervention, which is ultimately what it is. So in January, we'll be bringing those numbers along with the public health data.
Thank you. Members, we have further questions. I thought we might have.
Obviously, in January, the budget will be produced, and also the process where opposition parties may look at amendments to the budget. At what point in January will full details on CAS and the finances get out there for others to scrutinise and consider options?
Yeah, I might have to hand that over to John. John, have you got that?
So in terms of what point or further information?
Yeah, when we would be given further information, what opportunity will we have? Right.
So all I would add to what Councillor Cheney said is that we will be coming with a paper through the approval pathway to January. We also agreed with the Chair of OSM that we'll be bringing information about what we're doing before that in January to OSM for them to look at.
So that will be the opportunity then, I guess.
So just to be clear, will that paper be going to Budget Cabinet?
Yes.
Ultimately?
Yes, it will. Yes, it'll be that January Cabinet meeting. Yeah.
So it would be available for scrutiny beforehand, or for scrutiny by resources at its post?
Yes, and then for February for the full council budget.
Yeah, sorry, Heather.
Were we not told at some point this would be December? Was it going to be December and has been moved to January? Because you just said a very good justification why it was 12 months, but it was definitely in the press that it was December.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. I think so. I know that we're reliant on the public health data, which they only provide at the end of 12 months, I believe. So, John, correct me.
Yeah, I think I can't recall either, Councillor, but I think we did. We certainly reported, and I think we did say that it was going to be December. So apologies about that. I think we hoped we'd be able to take the data and analyse it more quickly than we are. We are doing that as quickly as we can and putting it all together for January. And part of the reason it's not available earlier than that is there's quite a lot of work involved in doing that, I'm afraid.
So there's currently proposals for budget savings about using the Clean Air Zone funds, and there's a motion to full council next week about the use of Clean Air Zone funds, and there's some wording around the majority. The majority of the fund should be used for focus on sustainable travel, active travel, and I don't know how we can consider that wording and how we can sort of consider these budget proposals that are out for consultation. If we're saying of an unknown amount of money, let's put this amount of it towards this thing that is not the main purpose of that money. And I don't know how the public or scrutinising councillors can consider that when we don't have a clue what that overall fund is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, we'll be bringing to the January Cabinet, you will have our recommendation for budget, and you will have all of the CAS information that you need to be able to propose your amendments to the budget in February. So that will give you all that opportunity, a month or more, to take that information and use it at your leisure to make that decision.
And how will you be voting on a motion that states, will the majority of the CAS money be spent on projects that focus on sustainable travel, given that we have a figure that is being proposed to be spent specifically on highway maintenance, but we don't know what the overall figure is?
I will follow my Labour Party whip once we've had our Labour discussion and voted on it and determined how we are voting.
And will the Labour discussion will the Labour discussion include the Labour Party that are deciding that, having an understanding of whether that figure is the majority of the CAS money or not?
They will have the same discussion as all other groups.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, so related obviously to what we've just sort of heard. The figure that has been released is that 82% of registered vehicles are now compliant. I think it was between 20 and 25% were not compliant before, so it's dropped to 18%. So around that, my query would be, is that in line with projections? And the projection is based on the deterrent effect or the pricing effect of a fee and possibly fines for those non-compliant vehicles entering the scheme. If they don't enter the scheme, it helps clean air, but it doesn't help the income from the scheme or to pay for the scheme. So the more effective the deterrent is, and the fewer vehicles have to pay even if they enter the scheme, the less income there will be. So has that been modelled, and are we in line with whatever was modelled?
I mean, so my first comment is, yeah, I mean, the perfect outcome for this scheme would there be no income at all because everyone, there's no issue anymore. I don't know, I'd have to hand the modelling question over to those in the know.
So, Councillor, you're right. I mean, that measure is one of the key things, key parts of the scheme. So that, all I can say really is that is something that the January report will cover in detail in terms of, where we are against that. So if that's okay, we'll pick it up then. If I could just pick up on the previous discussion, Chair, as well. I think it's just quite important to be clear that there are set rules for how any of any cash surplus above all the costs and things can be used for. So all of the money that will be applied in accordance with those rules. So that includes linkage to transport policy.
So I think just following on from Martin's comment, and I understand what you're saying, Craig, about the ideal would be that there was no income from the clean air zone. But if there was no income from the clean air zone, we've got an £8 million shortfall next year from the figures that you're taking from the clean air zone. So effectively, you're envisaging that over a period of 3 or 4 years, that surplus will disappear. And therefore, we have, on what we know you've committed here, we have 2 million a year of further spending pressure each year as the income diminishes. Is that, have I interpreted the figures that were presented correctly?
The kind of principle that, yes, I mean, so the clean air zone, I believe, is only exist for 3 or 4 years, is that? 3 years, I think, so 3 or 4 years. So at the end of which there'll be no income from clean air because there'll be no zone anymore. That's always within the projection. So.
But so my point is, if it had gone to fund one-off expenditure, that would have been fine. But if it's going to meet annual recurring expenditure, which is what you're doing with these 2 items, then that funding source will dry up, and we will therefore be having to face. We're deferring spending cuts for 1, 2, and 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess we're working. We're hoping for another government that might actually put some more money to the government, to be honest. But also we don't want to be making cuts to budgets where we don't need to. There's been a bit of time we don't need to. So.
Check. Could I just come in on as well?
Yes,
please. What Councillor Change is saying. So I mean, it's quite an important point actually that the time frame of the clean air zone is driven by the legal compliance issue. So that determines how long it lasts. So it's not that it's an immediate switch off if we reach legal compliance because there's a further period of testing. So we can't really specify exactly where we are, but Councillor Chin is absolutely right. We're sort of assuming more than 3 to 4 years, that sort of period at the moment. But on that basis, of course, yes, you're right. It isn't long-term funding, so we've been looking at the proposals in that light.
Thank you. John, and then Gary.
Thanks, Chair. Craig, I know you're not going to disclose the actual figure, no matter what, no matter what we say to you. But you'll obviously be seeing the figures monthly. So if we looked at month 1 versus month, 10, 11, has the income dropped significantly or not?
It hasn't dropped significantly. There has been an improvement in the number of cars that are compliant. as once.
Gary?
Yeah, I'd go back to the point about we need to check the wording on this very carefully so that the trickle of complaints doesn't become a flood, because it can spread. The second thing I'd like to say is that although there's an assumption that income will go down as more cars become compliant, is it possible that in the future the conditions might change and that they become more stringent conditions, or that we adjust the barriers, we adjust the boundaries, because there's only certain part of the city that's protected at the moment, rather than a larger part.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously this scheme was kind of foisted on us by the Conservative government. We've tried to mitigate the impacts on the poorest in the city, and we had a long to and fro government on that, and where open letters were written to us that we weren't doing things quickly enough, and then we were doing things too quickly, and so on. In the end, that will be for government to determine. We will reach the compliant levels of clean air in Bristol through the Clean Air Zone. If they change the levels of compliance, that changes, the goalposts, doesn't it? So no, then who knows what happens next? That's certainly all of which is for future administrators to discuss, not for me particularly, but at this moment in time, the intention, or in fact we're aware that we will hit compliance within the time frame. If compliant, as I say, if the rules around of what compliance means change, then it's a conversation.
Thank you. I think there are some CAS measures which haven't actually been implemented fully yet, despite having been planned and in many cases constructed. So I'm just wondering if there's a figure on how much income is not being collected as a result of non-implementation of implemented restrictions, if that follows.
That does make sense, but I don't know anything about that. John, I have to come in on that thing with Don.
I wasn't aware of that, Councillor, actually. Yeah, I mean, the CAS included certain proposals on the Cumberland Road which have now been implemented, if that was what you were referring to. I'm not aware that any haven't otherwise been implemented.
That was what I was referring to. There's rumours going around the community that the cameras aren't actually on, and people don't seem to be collecting fines, despite having told me they've driven through it several times. So I'm just wondering if that has been implemented yet. Because obviously that is a thing, and I'm presuming that wouldn't be the only case of that situation across the city.
Yeah, but there is a period at the beginning normally when the cameras are in place but are not switched on. We don't announce that cameras aren't switched on or aren't switched on. People are expected to obey the law whether or not the deterrent is in place or not.
Of course, no, I agree with that logic. I'm just wondering if there was a figure for the income foregone, but perhaps that's not too easy to pull out. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not aware, aside from, as John mentioned, I wasn't even aware of that actually, but aside from the change that John mentioned from the very original scheme, I'm not aware we've at any point had cameras off for long enough periods to have an impact in that way. I'm certainly not modelled that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on Clean Air Zone? Well,
thanks. The legal outcome required is to reach below 40 parts per million of nitrogen oxides on the average figure for a year. So that implies that there has to be a year's monitoring at least. While there's thought to be compliance, we still have to wait a year to see there still is. So that's then the end point of the scheme potentially. That is when it could be dismantled. Government says, yes, you've had a year, you have complied based on modelling and assumptions and all sorts of things. So it can be dismantled. At that point, if we haven't shifted people to cleaner travel, if we've used the money for other things, then it could get worse again. And the bad habits could be maintained that might cause pollution. Because if substantial funds aren't used to shift travel habits, then we won't really have cleaner air, will we? So this is an argument saying we should be as determined as possible to put the funding in to measures that allow cleaner travel. So dependence on it for anything else would be unwise if we actually want to comply.
sure is a question, but yeah.
So, Councillor, there are various things that we have already talked about that we will use Clean Air Zone funding for. One of which, as I'm sure you're familiar with from presentations done before, is the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement Programme. So a significant amount of funding, I think currently forecasting 10 million, will be used as the BCC match for those significant programmes, as an example. So there'll be more details that we'll provide of what we're planning to spend it. As I said, we're refining and we'll get that paper which will come to WASM and to January Cabinet. But as an example, that's something we've already put in the public domain, significant sustainable transport schemes which are going to be funded from Clean Air Zone surplus.
So the question I'm just going to put to members is whether anyone has any views on how we consider this information when it becomes available. And I was wondering what the initial thought was about doing it as a finance task group session in the first instance, because there might be a lot of detail and a lot of background questions which wouldn't necessarily be helpful for a scrutiny, before scrutiny meeting. And if we could do that, and if that was acceptable to officers, if we did it that way, and then we could report back to an appropriate scrutiny meeting when the budget papers are being considered. Would that seem a reasonable approach for us to work on? Yeah, Martin?
Could I just check? The report won't be purely financial, will it? I mean, it has to.
It would be it's public health.
And we'll be going to Osm already, so whether you want to.
So is that where it's
Osm?
Oh, right. Yeah. So when's it going to Osm?
I haven't got a date, Chair, unfortunately, but in January I go.
Right. Okay. Well,
so that's where the public health implications, because these things have to be looked at together.
In which case, Heather, if you and I can have a discussion with Tony, because I certainly don't want to take it away from Osm, but I think there are some pretty fundamental finance resources issues in this, which we should at least be involved in that discussion. So we don't want to make more work for officers, but I think there does need to be some engagement in that. So we'll watch the space on that one. Okay, so that deals with that one. So the next item, I think, is then resources issues. Just checking in, I've not missed anything. No. So resources issues. Key questions, area of scrutiny, so contingency and fees and charges were the two issues that were raised there. Members who'd like to start questioning on those? Tim?
So I apologise, but I found the papers for this meeting a bit confusing, to be honest. But is this the point where we're talking about the medium-term financial strategy? And is a question about that appropriate in this section?
This is appropriate here. Yeah, please.
I mean,
I've asked this question in private, but I'd like to ask it in public, and I think we've had more time since I asked it anyway. I would like to know what the implications of the recent mini-budget, whatever it's called, the government's recent financial statement, what the implications are of that in terms of funding for the council, and whether you could just clarify that for us.
I'll start and I'll probably get Denise coming after. So the two big things, one we've talked about already, is the household support fund, the removal of that, and the implications of that are quite big. I mean, we use that to provide free school meals for children outside of term time, and have provided vouchers for the past 3 years, I think. Not having that funding means that we won't be able to do that anymore, and that's or you're not allowed to, with fundamentals and loss, and that's not an easy thing to do. It was also used to pay for local crisis prevention funds, and that's used for people in emergency need of white goods or school uniform or a range of other things, so that's also a problem. So that's a big implication. There's £8 million that's gone. The other is the rise in national living wage, which has implications for contracts, not for us, but for contracts, which I think is to the tune of about £4.5 million we're expecting next year. So a pretty big impact, and kind of knock-ons to the other pay grades that sort of thing has. That's an admirable thing, believing people earning an appropriate wage, but we would hope it would come some extra funding from the council, as it is council of land and now kind of reading the consequences.
And just to clarify, there was nothing in the statement that would offset any of those difficulties for us. So basically, from that one issue, we could be £4.5 million worse off than we were before the statement.
Yeah, there was nothing new. There was no new income. No increase, in the previously outlined last year's budget.
I maybe provide some context, some greater context for you, just to help, and Councillor Chin is absolutely correct. So if you recall last year when the autumn statement was issued, there was also a policy statement that accompanied that, which provided us with an indication of what the 24-25 position was going to be. So where there was uplifts in areas such as social care and some of the social care funding, it was already outlined last year. And we had reflected all of those assumptions already within our medium-term financial plan. So it wasn't, I think if you look at the details in terms of the flat line, you can see that there are increases anticipated, but those increases were announced a year ago and planned for and built into our medium-term financial plan. I think the only areas that there may be some slight inflation uplift on top of that, but it's exactly the same position. So I think whilst we recognise there are some significant pressures for local government, and that was referred to in the statement, and recognition that inflation is higher than what it was anticipated to be, there's no additional funding to provide the support for that. So Councillor Cheney is correct in terms of the national living wage, and I think we need to reflect on the fact that Bristol City Council is a real living wage employer, so actually we have the compounded impact that actually it is above the figure that we'd anticipated. So if we think about the national living wage just in isolation, there were two changes referred to within that statement. The first of which we would increase or uplift the actual figure by, I think it's 9.8 or 9.9% to just shy of 10%, and then the other was 12%. So we have to think about the impact of that on our supply chain, particularly all of the areas of which we have officers or employees that are on lower tiers. So that's predominantly social care, waste, Bristol Waste in terms of our facilities management contracts. So whilst all of those are directly impacted to the scale of, say, 10%, and because of the way in which the actual pay is being aligned, where previously, historically, we had the advantage of just being able to apply a standard percentage uplift to all of our payroll data, so 3-4% payroll, where it's tiered in that way. It means that we have to make some allowances for 10% to 12% uplifts in a number of areas, and it's higher than what we anticipated it was going to be, so hence there's a direct impact that we now need to consider. In terms of our own payroll, whilst we are a real living wage employer, the fact that the national living wage uplift means that we also then have to consider all of the pay differentials within the council's pay tier. So there will be also, again, an impact on the council's pay provisions that we need to make as well as we go into 24-25.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that? In terms of the real living wage and the national living wage, has that increase lowered the differential between what we calculate to be a real living wage and how much the national living wage is, or because inflation has been so high, is that differential still the same?
So when then we set the actual pay awards for 23-24. I'm just looking at the data and the figures. So the local government pay awards were set at a figure just above the £11.44. So there was a pay differential at the time of over £1 between local government and the national living wage. The uplift now to 11.44 only takes it within pennies of the differential. The actual real living wage is approximately, I think it's about £12. So the real living wage has a differential of about £12, and so therefore the real living wage for next year will need to be reviewed again in comparison to. So the difference now between local government and the national living wage is, I think it's about 19p difference, and clearly local government don't want to be a minimum wage employee or employer, hence they will need to now have a look at what is the differential between the two. But all of our contracts are based on real living wage for all of our associated companies as well. So the Real Living Wage Foundation will also be having a look at what they set for the outside of the UK.
Martin?
Thank you. I've got one question on contingency and one on fees and charges. So in terms of contingency, the general fund is where major unexpected expenditure gets covered, doesn't it? So we've obviously had a major unanticipated expenditure with Spartan House, and that's ongoing at the moment. How much of that is coming from the general fund and how much is coming from the housing revenue account?
So I think it's entirely housing revenue account. Yeah. So there's no impact on general fund.
So none of the additional costs are considered but obviously that's damaging to the housing revenue account and all of the forecasts and plans for that.
Yeah, so the 30-year business plan is being reworked. Yeah.
Sorry?
The 30-year business plan is being reworked, but would have been anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So we'll have to review that whole investment plan as well. Okay. So the second question relates to fees and charges, which is, I can see on the page 26, GAP039, fees and charges budget review, which is intended to provide income generation. And it's only meant to apply for the year 24-25, so there's nothing anticipated for any future years, which concerns me, because almost all of these are only for a single year, which is very short term. But it says in the equalities impact, no significant equality impact has been identified, says at this stage, and further analysis will be required once specific budgets have been identified. So that implies we don't know which fees or which charges or which impacts they have?
No, actually. So I would say, so if you read what the item is saying, we're already getting more income than we expected, and we're just reflecting that in the budgets. So it's not an increase to fees and charges in as much as it's a reflection of what we're already receiving. So the budgets will be sized appropriately next year. The reason it doesn't go up is because it doesn't increase the year after. So it's the same amount for 1 year, the same amount then baseline for year on year. Then on, yeah.
So yes, so whatever comes from it carries on, and that is then in the set budget. But that implies that only a single set of changes is implied. Is that?
Well, it's a budget. It's just a budget. So all it is make sure that we currently receive that income. We're just making sure that the services are appropriately shown that within their budgets at the start of the year, rather than it reflecting through the years as they collect it. So it's a one-off exercise to resize the budget and right-size the budget.
Okay. But if any fees and charges weren't deemed appropriate to have been adjusted for this year, inflation...
We aren't adjusting any fees and charges. We're already receiving the income from the fees and charges. We're just adjusting the budget lines so they correctly reflect the amount of fees and charges you currently receive. So rather than saying you receive £1 million a year when we build the budget, and actually you get £1.5 million a year through that fee or charge. So we therefore are going to say at the beginning of the year, actually you receive £1.5 million a year in fees and charges.
But if we are planning to consider income generation opportunities, which is what it says, we would be reviewing them periodically. We'd be looking at benchmark costs and similar services and charges. But there would still be a potential equalities impact, wouldn't there?
There would. We took a paper cabinet this week about fees and charges and increases generally, which had a equalities impact assessment within it. You can have a look and that specifies some specific areas where we felt we were undercharging or charging in ways that weren't necessarily in line with the market.
And how you construct those charges could have the equalities impact.
Can I maybe respond, because there is no equalities impact to this saving proposal. I'll just explain it slightly differently, but I'll be saying exactly the same thing. So every year we set the budgets, we set them early in the process. So for example, we'll be setting budgets or calculating budget uplifts now in preparation for implementation in April. At the end of the financial year, we often do a review based on the outturn to say what did we actually receive in terms of the income being generated. So this exercise, we've actually reviewed the actual outturn for the two previous years, and just based on the actual outturn, I'm proposing to adjust the budgets in a couple of areas. That doesn't change the fee, it doesn't change the actual impact. What it basically indicates is that we're actually collecting more. The outturn indicates for the last 2 years we've collected more than the actual budget. So therefore now this will just re-baseline to that actual outturn for a couple of those areas.
Any other questions? In which case, if we move on to the capital strategy, and perhaps if I just follow on from Martin's question about the housing revenue account, and the Barton House issue clearly highlights the extent of the problem. If work were done to remediate Barton House, and that also dealt with the cladding issue, one would be removing the Waking Watch ongoing costs that were budgeted for that property. Are we aggressively looking at whether we can bring forward the improvements needed to those properties with Waking Watch in order to reduce the ongoing revenue costs that are denuding the HRA of available funds?
I mean, I'd have to defer to Kyle or Tom, or unfortunately, John, I don't know if you can.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we do have a programme to carry out the works linked very much to prioritising those areas that do have Waking Watch, partly from a cost point of view, but partly because obviously it's an advisable thing to do in any event, Councillor. So that's a programme that's already built in.
And are we happy that that is producing an improvement in the situation? Are we actually able to show the revenue saving in future years by taking out those compliance costs?
I mean, so this has happened in some plots already. I'm really pleased to report to it. We've had recently, there's an email went round yesterday saying that this had happened and that we would be standing there with watching in particular. I can't recall the name of the block, I'm afraid, Councillor, but it is an ongoing programme, so those costs come out as and when those works are carried out.
Okay, members. I'll let others come up with questions on the capital strategy. Mark.
Thanks, Chair. I was interested in the skills and the knowledge section of the capital programme, particularly training for those with investment responsibilities. I was a bit concerned where it says appropriate training will be provided. I was kind of expecting it has been provided. You know, could I have an update on how the training is being rolled out? Because I would certainly expect that if an officer has investment responsibilities that they've been trained for that particular function. Might just be a wording issue, but it's a bit of a reassurance, I think.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, it's probably a timely point, if that's okay, to talk about the capital portfolio transformation programme. So as you know, particularly around issues like forecasting, I'm sure councillors have asked many questions about this in the past, but we haven't been as good as we should have been in terms of our forecasting and capital programme. So we are doing a 12-month programme at the moment to review the portfolio, to make sure we've got a good understanding between the GNR teams, who primarily is, and Denise's teams that work on this in partnership, and that we've got the right skills in the right places, Councillor, as you said there. So to be fair, it is an ongoing process, and we are, rather than, the approach is simply being to offer support and additional advice where it might be needed. So I do take your point, but it is something we deliberately, we are asking people if they would like additional support around this to try and improve the performance of that area.
Yeah, I mean, what we know, Mark, you know this as well as me, you know, year on year we have an ambitious programme, year on year we don't deliver against that programme. That doesn't necessarily mean that things don't happen, they just don't happen in the phasing that we expect at the beginning of the year. So that, and as you work through the year, the forecasting continues to not correctly identify that really we're going to finish at the end of the year, and that's been a frustrating thing for me for 7 years, maybe 8 years. And we had numerous attempts at trying to resolve that problem. I mean, we had a meeting on Wednesday night, and I have a horrible feeling that we're going to resolve it just as I finish. This is going to be very frustrating. But that said, it'll be a wonderful thing, because I think we're reaching the point now that the current review that John mentioned, I think, and it's dropping, I think we're getting there. But it's you know, I've thought about it before, so you never know how might be right. But it's a tough one.
I think at some point it would be useful, because obviously we've been through the transformation aspects of work, both at Oldham and here. It would be useful just to have an update at some point about how the skills agenda within the capital programme and in those with investment responsibilities in particular is being rolled out. So it would be helpful at some point just have an update on how that is progressing. Because it's a key area of activity, and if we get it right, if we get it better, it benefits so many aspects of what we're doing as an authority.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. We can update on the whole of that programme at the relevant forum. Absolutely happy to do that.
I think the comment I'd make on that topic is that it was encouraging to see that we're not borrowing as much money as we thought we were, until we realised that that's because we're not completing our capital projects as quickly as we ought to be. And at that point, whilst the relief is there in the sense that it means we're earning interest on money that we thought we'd have spent, we know the cost of those projects has probably gone up, and we're failing to deliver. So I do think this issue of how we manage to, you know, and I know it's not this administration that's the one that's had this problem. Every administration's had this problem for as long as anyone can remember. So it's not a political point, but it is just a plea of how can we really make these models work. We keep coming up with new ways to deliver, but actually each year we keep seeing that we don't manage to.
Although it has been improving, we did notch up to 199 million last year, 300 instead of 160 something in previous years. It is improving, but yeah.
It's probably worth just reminding again what context there's been in the last 12 months for delivering capital programmes. House building, new house developments are sort of grinding to a halt nationally. Definitely, we're not immune from that here in Bristol. Supply chains have been wrecked, businesses going under. We talked earlier about the cladding programme. You know, you cannot get certain types of firms for love nor money, and so one of our challenges has always been how do we keep our reporting up to date when the market is moving. And I think our governance is good. Our ability to do dynamic reforecasting is an area we need to work at. But that's against the backdrop where I would have said that in about 2019, 2020, that was when we saw some movement, and then COVID hit, and then we had the inflation issues, and the whole market is on its knees. So I think we might be getting better at forecasting just as the market is getting really, really worse. So I think I always, when I was in John's role, I was always exhorting people to do more to improve their realism. But I would always rather the project was done right than have great reporting and frankly no delivery. At the moment we are improving our reporting. Delivery is a heck of a challenge.
Members, do you have anything else you want to ask before we bring this half of the meeting to a conclusion? No? Okay. In which case, officers, thank you for your time. Don and Craig, thank you both for coming, and Craig in particular. I think part of the reason that this meeting has been relatively brief is because the support your officers have given the Finance Task Group has actually resulted in so many discussions and so many questions being covered. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all members of the group and saying, thank you for allowing your officers to be as open with us and share the information with us, and I hope it's been a beneficial process both ways. So thank you for that. Stephen, thank you for your time. Adjourn this meeting until 9:30 on Friday of next week. Thank you.